I was not planning to become a courtroom punchline, but the judge in Branch 12 had a voice like a morning radio host and a habit of tapping his gavel in a soft shoe rhythm as if he'd come here to deliver a tight five. The court reporters smothered a laugh as the bailiff swore me in. "State your name for the record," the clerk said, and I told them, John Ames of Lexington Hills, a neighborhood with 3 cul-de-sacs, 2 dog parks, 1 overzealous HOA, and a thriving black market in porch furniture stolen and traded via next door. I stood there thinking the whole system felt like a parody of justice, until the DNA envelope came out and the judge, in true American daytime television cadence, announced that the probability I fathered the child known as Baby J was 0%. He didn't say the line from Maury, but the room heard it anyway. It drifted through the paneled air like confetti from an invisible party popper. "You are not the father." Across from me, Emily dabbed her eyes with a tissue that matched her blazer, a detail probably suggested by her attorney, who'd been smiling the weary smile of a man who spends his days trying to launder betrayal through the washing machine of civil procedure. Emily had come home 2 months earlier, vanished, then returned with a baby that was not mine, and I was the one who turned the whisper, "cheating wife," into the loudest 2 words ever to echo down the aisles of our church. You want to know what revenge looks like in America? It doesn't always look like baseball bats and scorched earth Facebook posts. Sometimes it's 1,000 tiny cuts made of paper, bank statements, notarized letters, a browser folder of screenshots named "This is Why," and a DNA report that settles the room. The judge asked if I had anything to say before he ruled on the support petition. I glanced over at my parents, who looked like they'd aged out of their own faces this year, at my sister, who had a daily prayer chain for me, and also a group chat called Emily Watch, where they tracked my cheating wife's movements with a zeal that might have been unconstitutional, at our pastor, who'd already suggested counseling twice because family shouldn't quit on family. As if the word family had the power to exorcise infidelity. I could say something profound, I thought. I could deliver a sermon on toxic love, the kind that dresses itself in self-care vocabulary. I'm doing this for me. I need to find my truth, while it bulldozes the human beings who trusted you. I could declare that betrayal does not make you a poet. It makes you a person who lies creatively. Instead, I cleared my throat and told the court about the sleep training app that kept congratulating me at 3:07 a.m. for nailing the bedtime routine, and how every congratulation felt like a prank from the algorithm. I told them about Costco runs where you unconsciously reach for diapers and then remember the baby is not yours and lift your hand away like the merchandise is radioactive. I told them about the lacrosse dad who cornered me in the parking lot to tell me his brother went through the same thing, except it was twins and the other guy was her boss. And how America runs on Duncan, sure, but also on gossip. The judge watched me like this was a TED Talk he hadn't asked for. He finally said, "Mr. Ames, I sympathize deeply. We'll dismiss the petition for support. The parties are free to pursue divorce and domestic relations." I didn't smile. I could feel Emily's attorney recalculating fees in real time. I could hear my mother exhale like a balloon giving up. Revenge, if we're keeping score, wasn't the court order. Revenge was me choosing to narrate this whole circus on my terms, not as the sad husband in a country song, but as a man who knows where to put the joke. I'd already named my podcast Not the Father, with an opening theme that sounded like the intro to a true crime show but turned into a hymn. We live in a country where everything can be content, where pain becomes a brand, where you can order t-shirts that say, "My cheating wife went to a desert commune and all I got was this DNA test." America is shameless and self-aware at the same time. It will sell you closure with prime shipping. But the real revenge was quieter. I kept my house, my credit, my quiet, my calendar that used to be Emily's, my mornings at the park with the old guys who debate the Philadelphia Eagles like theologians, my father's laugh at the grocery store when he pretends to scan and bag like he's a contestant on a game show. When it was over, the judge tapped his gavel, and we all rose in a rustle of polyester. Emily looked at me like the desert had followed her back and set up camp behind her ribs. "I didn't plan this," she whispered as we passed. "Nobody plans betrayal," I said. "They just pack for it." Outside, the sun was indecently bright. An ambulance howled past with the urgency of a plot twist. The courthouse lawn hosted a fall festival of pigeons. I shook my attorney's hand and told him I'd leave a review like the kind you write for diners. Good service, portions generous, would sue again. Then I walked to my car. The podcast would drop on Friday. The episode was called Baby on Board of Directors, because if you don't laugh at your life will do it first. That's the end, or it's the beginning some people prefer. Either way, the story everyone thinks they know starts here, with a piece of paper and a silence that feels like mercy. But to get why it stings and why it's funny, you have to go backward. To the night my cheating wife reappeared like a commercial break no one asked for. She knocked like a pizza delivery, 3 light taps, and when I opened the door, there she was. Emily, hair shorter, eyes wider, a baby in her arms swaddled in a blanket that said, "Dream big, little one," which felt like a note from the universe addressed to anyone who enjoys satire. I didn't say her name first. I said the month. 2. She nodded, swallowing air. I know. And for a second, the American sun over our American porch framed us like a Target ad about forgiveness. She didn't ask if she could come in. She handed me the diaper bag like it was a briefcase with Exhibit A and pushed past me into a house that had rearranged itself to survive without her. A candle burned on the counter with a scent named something like wood smoke and dad. The thermostat had learned my climate preferences and never once asked how they made me feel. The living room wore its new minimalism like a vow. She put the baby on the couch in that O-shaped cushion that looks like an honorary degree in parenting and looked at me in a way that used to be an invitation and now was a question without answer. "He's hungry," she said, and I felt my ribs invent a new vocabulary word for ache. If this were a serious drama, we would sit down at eye level and speak in full sentences. Instead, Emily began with a monologue that could only happen to Americans because we've been trained by podcasts to turn our lives into narratives with plucky act breaks. "It started with a wellness retreat," she said, and I already saw the Instagram flyer with the beige background and the serif font, the promise to release ancestral trauma through guided breathwork and ethically sourced smoothies. The retreat was in the desert, obviously. Sedona adjacent, she clarified, like proximity to vortexes is real estate. She said the leader was a man named Skylar Moon, which is either a stage name or a punchline, and that he'd been a guest on 3 podcasts about sovereign living and one about choosing your own last name. They had us turn off our phones in a basket shaped like a nest. We were encouraged to detach from linear time. Translation, no receipts. "I know how this sounds," she said, and I told her to skip to the part where this got her a baby. Emily's version unfolded like a conspiracy theory you only half believe, which is to say extremely American. The retreat, the breathwork, a ceremonial tea, a lecture about how children conceived under capitalist frequencies carry subconscious debt, and a philosophy where family is a circle you draw in the sand around whoever is near enough to hear you whisper, "I choose you." In another room, a midwife from Portland on a gap year from normalcy explained that love could be quantum and that the paternity paradigm is an instrument of colonial control. In other words, betrayal with a TED Talk. I asked her if Skylar was the father. She said that wasn't how they said it. I reminded her we live in a country where child support still says it that way. She bit her lip like a teenager at the mall. "I was lost, John," she said. "I felt like we were just routines and bills and Costco samples, and I wanted to feel wonder again." I almost laughed. Americans chase wonder like points on a credit card. We will finance wonder, refinance it, upgrade to Wonder Plus. I pictured Skylar's jawline and his way of saying namaste like he had trademarked it. I asked again who the father was. She finally said a name I didn't recognize, a donor from a sacred seed share, which is a phrase I can't believe I am putting in my mouth. There's a version of me that throws things here, the kind of revenge that winds up on a police report and a Reddit thread, but the man in my house has learned to weaponize calm. I made coffee. The baby made a noise like he was testing out a laugh in another language. Emily touched the couch like she was reacquainting herself with fabric. She kept saying, "I'm sorry," in a register that sounded like she'd rehearsed it, and asked if I could please just help for now. "I'm trying to figure out my truth," she said, like truth is a piece of IKEA furniture you can build with a tiny hex key and the courage to ignore the diagram. I did help. This is the part of the story people think is defeat, but it's just what Americans do in crisis. We assemble. I learned baby swaddles by watching a nurse on YouTube who had the clipped authority of a Marine. I bought a second-hand stroller off Facebook Marketplace and negotiated like I was buying a used car. The neighbors delivered casseroles because in the suburbs betrayal smells like mac and cheese, and everybody wants a roll. The church ladies showed up with a prayer that sounded like a legal disclaimer. My father installed a baby gate at the top of the stairs with a solemnity usually reserved for the American flag. Emily slept like jet lag was a theology and woke to say we could try counseling if it would make me feel less abandoned. Counseling, I thought, won't put the toothpaste back in the tube. At night, when the baby cried, I paced the hallway, and the house whispered back all the words I never got to say. Infidelity isn't an exit strategy, I told the drywall. It's a plot device you use when you're out of craft. I kept thinking of our first date at the diner off Route 8, how she ate pancakes like they were a personality, how we told the waitress we had a big future, which is American code for we have a 401k and a Spotify family plan. I remembered vows that said things about storms, about sheltering each other under umbrellas of grace, and how betrayal is a weather system with your spouse's name on it. And I'll admit it, some nights I pictured revenge as a billboard. "Hey, Skylar, I hope you find your truth in small claims court." I never bought one. I wrote into a notebook instead, turned the story into a script where I get the microphone. That's the night I named the podcast. 2 weeks in, a letter arrived from an entity called Temple of the Soft Sun, thanking us for holding space for a new paradigm of kinship and requesting a donation for the postpartum village. The letterhead included a QR code and a P.O. box in Nevada. I laughed so hard the baby startled, the dog barked, Emily woke, and the moment evaporated. I folded the letter, placed it under a magnet on the fridge that said, "Live, laugh, lawsuit," and told Emily, point blank, we were getting a DNA test. She said that felt combative. I said it felt like science. America likes evidence. Give it a lab, a barcode, a chain of custody, and suddenly you're not crazy. You're just a man with results. The day the test came back, I didn't open it. I made spaghetti. We ate on opposite sides of the island. The baby cooed at the light over the sink like he was in love with electricity. Then I opened the envelope, and the math did what the English language hadn't. It ended the debate. She cried. I breathed. The next day, she filed for support, and I filed for clarity. That's how we ended up in Branch 12, and why this part of the story feels like a pilot episode with a perfectly tidy ending. But if you want to understand how we got to a wellness retreat in the first place, you have to go back further, to the month where I was a detective with a Costco card and a cart full of circumstantial evidence. Someone once told me that Americans think in genres. When my wife vanished, I thought like a podcaster, then a detective, then a comedian with breakup material in a spiral notebook. The second morning after she was gone, I woke up at 5:11 a.m. because the house learned the sound of her absence and weaponized it against me. I drove to the police station with a to-go coffee and the print out of her last text. "I need headspace, don't call," like that wasn't the verbal version of a door slamming without touching it. The desk sergeant nodded through a script shaped by 1,000 missing people who weren't actually missing. And I filled out a report that made me sound like a calm man. I was not calm. At home, I did what Americans do when our hearts break. I opened a spreadsheet. Tabs labeled timeline, contacts, money, places, clues. I logged her last debit card ping at a gas station off I-40, then a motel in Tucumcari, then a yoga studio in Santa Fe with a name like Breathe and Bloom. None of it proved cheating, of course. People move through the world in patterns that don't confess. But when I checked our shared email, I found a thread with a subject line that read, "Retreat Checklist," and a list that included white clothing for ceremony and your own cup. I am a generous man, but I thought, you need your own cup because these people are weird. The attachment was a PDF with pastel gradients and a group photo of beautiful people with the hollow joy of folks who have monetized their personal growth. The leader, Skylar, wore a linen shirt that looked like it had been steamed by a private cloud. I took it to Karen from the HOA, because if there's one thing an HOA president loves more than citing bylaws about mailboxes, it's solving a mystery she has no business solving. Karen poured me iced tea and told me, "You deserve answers," like she was deputizing me into a reality show where I would find them by Act 3. She printed the flyer on her industrial printer and circled Skylar's face with a red Sharpie. "He's either a yoga teacher or a pyramid scheme," she said, "and in my experience, those are the same." She posted a question on Nextdoor that read, "Anyone familiar with Temple of the Soft Sun?" which summoned a chorus of testimonies from the town's eccentrics. "My niece went. She sells crystals now. They borrowed my folding chairs and never returned them. Skylar hit on my husband at Sprouts." I pinned every comment to the board until it looked like the inside of a conspiracy theorist's skull. People kept telling me to breathe, which is the kind of advice that mostly benefits the advice giver. I breathed. I called Emily's sister, who told me I was overreacting because Emily is a free bird, always has been, a sentence often used to bless infidelity with a quirk of temperament. Free birds still come home, I wanted to say. She didn't. I began to narrate my days in second person, like a life hack article. You buy groceries. You cry in your car where no one can hear. You scroll her Instagram and realize her Finsta has been a semaphore flag for discontent you didn't read. You ask yourself if you are the villain, and the answer is yes, and also no. Americans love villains. We can rehabilitate in spin-offs. You check your phone every 10 minutes, like it's a slot machine that might pay out love if you just keep pulling. Karen suggested we visit the yoga studio together, which is the kind of sentence you agree to when you've stopped pretending pride is useful. We found a receptionist with the voice of a very calm alarm clock and asked if Skylar rented space or just wafted through like incense. She said he was in and pointed to a back room where the music sounded like water having opinions. He greeted us with a smile that had work done. He recognized me somehow. Maybe Emily's story had put me in his mythology as the husband who doesn't get it. He told me the retreat was about alignment, not adultery. I told him my life had been aligned on Emily since we were 22, and now it felt like someone had kicked the chalk lines in my head. He patted my shoulder with the pity you save for people who still use calendars and vowed to send a message if he heard from her. Then he invited me to a men's circle where we could process the feminine leaving, which made me want to bite a couch cushion. I turned then to the internet, that great American town square where your neighbors include a retired litigator, a 20-year-old with 3 million TikTok followers, and a man who is very sure the lizard people run the DMV. I posted on a forum for spouses of the missing, and a guy from Idaho messaged me a 5-paragraph essay on government mind control and frequency weapons. That night I took my dad to Applebee's because routine is a parachute, and he told me about his friend from the plant whose wife left for 3 weeks to find herself and came back with a tattoo of a compass and a small dog named River. "They made it work," he said, "but your mother says that was because he learned to make smoothies." I told him smoothies wouldn't fix infidelity. He said, "They won't, but putting something in the blender sometimes helps." Days blurred into a single long American afternoon, half in strip malls, half in my head. I taught myself to cook like a man in witness protection. I went to church and felt like the sanctuary had too many eyes. A teenager in youth group asked me point blank if my wife had gone full hippie, which felt like a demographic slur, but not wrong. Then, on the 39th day, I got an email from an address I didn't know with a subject line that said, "John, it's me." The body read, "I'm okay. I need a little more time. Don't try to find me." It was the courtesy notification of betrayal, like a flight delay text from an airline that knows you have nowhere else to go. I printed the email and pinned it next to a map with lines to everywhere she might be. Under the map, I wrote "revenge" in capital letters as a joke to myself, because I knew the revenge I wanted wasn't loud. It was just me staying intact, not burning my life down to match her wildfire, keeping our mortgage current and our dog walked, and my soul's volume set to not destroy. When she returned, if she returned, I wanted to be able to look at myself without flinching. Somewhere between a caffeine crash and a list of tasks, I decided that's the only revenge that grows up well. It doesn't make great TV. It does, however, make for a great podcast. And then she did come back. The knock on the door. The baby. The smell of desert rain clinging to her hair like a slogan you can't scrub out, which brings us back to the porch, the explanation, the letterhead, the test, the court. If you still think this was an accident that could happen to anyone, take a breath and follow me to the start, when the signs were not signs yet, and the laughs were still generous, and I thought a late-night Pilates class was for abs. We were fine, which is what Americans say when we mean we were busy enough not to notice the crack. On Sundays, we went to church and took turns holding the pastor's new baby while he preached about family, a word that landed like confetti and dust. On Mondays, we meal prepped in Tupperware that whistled hope when you snapped the lid. On Wednesdays, Emily had Pilates, and on Thursdays I played pickup basketball in the rec center where the scoreboard flickered like an omen. Fridays were takeout and a show about people who renovate houses and talk about shiplap like it's destiny. We scheduled intimacy the way you pencil in oil changes. The dog knew our timing and got bored. The red flags didn't come as big dramatic gestures, they came as upgrades. Emily bought a water bottle the size of a small drum and said it changed her life. She started saying nourish unironically, which is a verb you never want to hear directed at the self if you're the spouse of the self. She switched to oat milk, which felt like treason in a house where our wedding latte art had been cow-based. She used the phrase inner work in a sentence that did not involve a contractor. She wore leggings to places you wear jeans. She was radiant, which is a detail I leave in because it was true and because betrayal doesn't make somebody ugly. Sometimes it makes them glow with the confidence of a person about to ruin the timeline. Our fights calcified around nothing. "You're emotionally static," she'd say, and I'd look at the bills like, somebody's got to be. She wanted a spontaneous road trip to the petrified forest. I wanted to keep the electricity on. She asked me if I ever felt like our love was a sitcom stuck in season 6. I said most shows don't make it that far, which is the kind of joke you make when you think laughter can carry a sofa by itself. She started following accounts with words like sovereign and sacred and unfolding. I rolled my eyes and then apologized because America has taught us to apologize for rolling our eyes as if that's the problem. There was a night in July when she stood in the kitchen and said, "Do you ever think we should have met later?" It was too honest to dodge. I told her later we would have met worse versions of ourselves. She said maybe later we would have had more choices. She started to cry and said it wasn't about cheating, and I believed her because the word cheating still tasted like something other people did, like a scandal you read during lunch and forget by dinner. That week she posted a quote on Instagram that said, "Sometimes you have to break your life to make your life," and her sister commented 3 hearts, which is the equivalent of sending gasoline to a campfire. She signed up for a weekend retreat at a vineyard where they promised gentle rebirth through guided silence. I said we could do guided silence at home if she wanted. She smiled the kind of smile that says, "Never mind." When she got back, she had a bracelet made of beads that looked like they might whisper at night. She said she wanted to do a longer retreat to see who I am without the noise. I told her the noise was our life. She said maybe that was the problem. I said maybe the problem is you think you're a podcast episode. She laughed because she is kind, and that's the kind of line that earns at least a laugh. We made love with the tenderness of people who are trying to steer back onto the road by moving the wheel an inch. We had dinner with my folks the Sunday before she left. My mother asked if we were thinking about children in that way mothers pretend is casual, and Emily said, "Sometimes the most loving thing is not to bring someone into a story when you don't know the ending." My father nodded like that was philosophy. I thought it sounded like an exit. Later, washing dishes, Emily put her hands in the suds and said, "Do you ever think love is a set of habits?" I said yes, and that's not a criticism. That's a miracle. That's how you keep a garden alive. She said she wanted a forest. I said forests have lightning strikes. She said maybe they need to burn sometimes. We kissed like a compromise. On a Tuesday, she left the house with a backpack and a promise to text from the gym. She didn't. She didn't post, which felt louder than posting. Her phone went to voicemail, that cheery American woman telling me my call had been forwarded, like Betrayal had administrative staff. I spent the first night pretending I misread something, the second night emailing people who had once liked her posts, the third groping for answers that didn't taste like infidelity. The dog slept at the foot of the bed as if he knew loyalty would be the only plot point I could rely on. When I finally found the retreat flyer in her car, stuck under the passenger seat, next to a green apple with 2 bites taken, the kind of detail a novelist would mock for being too on the nose, I felt ridiculous for not seeing any of it sooner. But this is how it happens in America, where our cultural literacy in betrayal is high and our optimism is higher. You assume it's a phase. You assume the cheating wife is a character from a show you don't watch, not the person who cooks eggs next to you murmuring, "We should go to the farmer's market Saturday." You walk around holding a key that no longer opens the door and tell yourself the lock is jammed. You look for the locksmith in podcasts and sermons and your father's jokes and Karen's outrage, and find, instead, a man named Skylar with a linen shirt and a recipe for your undoing disguised as freedom. Here's the part I keep because it messes with the neatness of the story. We loved each other, truly. If love were a voting system, we'd have had a majority. What we lacked was a constitution, something that could not be amended on a whim by a charismatic stranger with a microphone. I don't say that to absolve myself of the ways I coasted. I coasted. I treated our love like cruise control. She wanted a manual transmission with the top down and a playlist. The second week of August, she packed a small bag and a big feeling and went west. 2 months later, she showed up with a baby and a story about quantum kinship and hand-thrown cups and my truth. The truth I lived was simpler. There was a man in Lexington Hills who had to decide what kind of husband he would be after his wife stopped being his wife while still wearing the T-shirt he bought her at the state fair. He chose not to self-immolate. He chose revenge that looked like staying decent. He chose, as America taught him to choose, to keep moving, to keep telling it, to keep making dinner, to keep going to work, to keep putting his hand on the dog's head and saying, "We're okay, buddy," even when the air was thick with endings. And that's how we got here. The court, the envelope, the gavel with a sense of humor. The baby, beautiful and blameless, carrying none of my features and all of my grief. The cheating wife, blinking under fluorescent lights, asking if we might try again in a year, as if betrayal ages like wine. The podcast microphone ready on my desk. The country, vast and loud, making room for one more story that is both particular and as common as football on Sundays. I told it this way, backward, because that's how it felt living it. The punchline first, then the setup, then the clues I missed because they were camouflaged as regular life. If you're listening for advice, I have little. Just this. Don't let someone else's infidelity turn you into a version of yourself you'd cross the street to avoid. Revenge that ruins you is just a sequel to their betrayal. Revenge that preserves you is a pilot for whatever comes next.